All right. Hi, everybody. So my name is Lukas. I'm really happy to have you all this morning here or the evening, wherever your time zone is. And today, the idea of this little stream will be to show you around how we can help you with your dependencies. And before we get started, I just want to introduce you to two friends I brought with me today. One, you might all know, or I hope so, that is our Octocat, Mona Lisa. I have her here as a plush. And she will help me guide you through this process today. And on the other side, because it will be about dependencies and how to fix them, I brought the other big helper at GitHub with me. And that is our little Hubot. So if you don't know Hubot, he is actually an open source project, and we call him the most working person at GitHub. So he actually is used quite a lot at us as a chatbot who can interact with anything at GitHub. And getting started with that, it would be interesting for me, who of you is already a GitHub user and has a profile as I'm showing here? Feel free to use the chat about that. So I just want to get started with what is usually the starting place for any project at GitHub, and it is your own profile. And what you can see here is my GitHub profile. If you know the old design, it has changed a little bit over the last months. I see a lot of people, is using GitHub, Vicaragit, PL. So really nice to see you guys. And I think you all will have such a profile. So what you can see here is the contributions I did. To be honest, they are really high in my profile because I do quite a lot with GitHub, not just with coding. So if you don't know that yet, GitHub is actually doing most of its stuff within GitHub. And we even force the legal people or the sales people to use Git and GitHub. So I think this is quite a cool thing. And in this repository, what I will do today is go through some projects with you and show a little bit how we can solve what I would call the dependency hell. So you all know dependencies, the software we build on, and the aim is really to get you through this process. If you get stuck with something, or if you're interested in learning something more, just feel free to use the chat. I'm always happy to follow up with you. And otherwise, this is really an interactive session. So the idea is just that we go through this process, learn something on the way. And in the end, I would be happy if you try it out yourself. So let's get started maybe with something else I wanted to show you. And I think that is a nice thing about GitHub, which you might not know yet. And it's called the Octocat generator. So there is a project I have on GitHub done with a good colleague of mine. And here is the source code. And what it actually is an app that allows you to create your own Mona Lisa. And there's a little bit of background because we used it actually on conferences. At the moment, they're only virtual, so it's hard to do. But on conferences, you can design your own Octocat and just print it as a sticker, which I think is pretty cool. And now let's maybe design our own Octocat for this stream. So this is the site, Octocat demo, github.io. For those who are interested, that is actually hosted in GitHub. And if you do not know, you can host a website from your GitHub repository. So you just have to have like a static website in the repository, go to settings, and then you can host it. So no need to buy additional web space for the projects. And if I get started here, you will see this little editor here. And so I want to do this interactively. So I need your ideas on how we could design the Octocat here. So let's get started with the color. The first one to give me a color, that will be the color I'm choosing. So let me know, which color should we give to Mona for our stream? Pink. Okay, great. Have to look for pink. I think that goes in the right direction. Yeah. Thank you. So we have the color. Now let's get started maybe with some hair. So what hair should you get? I will choose the color, but you can choose the style. So we have quite some selection there. Very good. We have long hair. We can give it some more creative hair. So let me know, what should we take? Mohawk. Let's see where I find that. think it goes in the direction maybe. And I will choose some darker hair for her. And then let's look for some nice accessories. So props here, I mean. So you see we have quite some props you can give her, like a coffee mug, like a notebook. And I think for this day, since we're on Twitch, I give her a gamepad. And then let's just look for something nice to wear. And I think she, of course, needs to get a Github t-shirt. So that's the AutoCAD created for the stream. I will share the link, of course, in the chat if you're interested. You can Twitter it. That's interesting. I will share that later in the stream, but thank you all for your interaction here. And now we will get started to tell you about dependency insights. So let's get started with a little project I have here. And as with every project, this is just the starting point in GitHub to go to the repository side. What you will see here is the source code. So in this section, I have my code of this little project. It's done in Node.js. So if you are from the JavaScript community, it might be interesting for you. What I'm showing here could also be used with other languages like Java, C#, C if you're into that. And this little project is really simple. It's actually, you can see here in the GIF, just a simple web server. So that's usually what you would do starting a Node.js project, creating a little server, showing something, and then test this. And what you can see here is that this server is using an endpoint from our API that creates a little animated Mona Lisa with a scent of GitHub. So you will ask, what is the scent of GitHub? It's quite funny because the scent of GitHub is actually a collection of ideas that we use to create GitHub. And you can use that endpoint actually. It's really simple. It's linked here. It's api.github.com/AutoCAD. We'll share that also in the chat. And as it's used, you get this little ASCII art and always a scent of GitHub. In this case, mind your words. Good idea if you're on Twitch. And if you hit it again, let's see here, other sense. And there is even a blog post about it. So the scent of GitHub was one of the driving forces for our developers on how we create GitHub. What are the essential rules for us when we create a product? And this is available with the API and it's put into this little package. And there is one thing that we all know when we use Node.js, and that is the dependency hell. Because I read it was an article that told me that if you do a little Hello World project on Node.js, then it usually needs like dependencies that have a size around 600 MB. And there are several hundred dependencies. And when they check these dependencies for a simple Hello World project, there were a lot that were also contradictory, like that weren't even necessary. And that's why we at GitHub thought, so how can we help you as a developer manage that better? And to get started, maybe let's have a look where the dependency is of this project. So if I look here, there is a file called package.json. And that file actually allows you to get an insight in what dependencies we have here. So a package.json file is a file that every Node.js project will create at some point. And it allows you to set up some things so that others can also install your project. So what you can see here is we have this section here, which is about the dependencies. I can make it a little bigger, so if you can see it better. And these dependencies are listed with the name of the dependency and then the version it is in. And this is needed because usually our software today uses some packages that somebody else wrote. And we have to install them usually to make use of that functionality so we can use someone else's code. And that's usually done through a package manager, like for Node.js, it's npm. And what it also has is some information about here, the name of the project, a little description, what it's about, the license, Kitty Offer, which is Pierre Luigi. He is a colleague and friend of mine. He's also working at GitHub. And then here you see these comments like start or test, and they actually allow you to define what should happen if you hit npm start or npm test. So it's straightforward. And we at GitHub created something we call the dependency graph. Who of you has heard about the dependency graph so far? Great. We have one here. Yeah, two. Really good. So the dependency graph is something that we build in GitHub based on this file. And it's hidden in your repository in this little section called Insights. So Insights is something I barely used before joining GitHub. I did not really know that this section was there, but it's quite interesting because it gives you this little pulse of what is happening in my repo. It allows you to show the contributors so we can see who actually did something on this code. Like here, I'm the #1 contributor, but it's my repo, so no offense there. And then what is quite interesting is this section here called Dependency Graph. And what that does is it actually looks in these two files as it lists here, the package JSON and the package log JSON. And what we then do is we look for the dependencies that are used and then the dependencies these dependencies use. And we also list the versions that you have in use. So why is that helpful for you? Because we can use that information actually to do quite some interesting things. On the one side, you get an understanding of how is your project actually built up. And I think that is always important because there have been occasions where people had a dependency in there that could cause trouble. Yet other languages are supported. So I think Peter can add in the chat a list of the languages that we have. And the interesting thing is here that we can do this as long as a language actually has a certain package ecosystem. So as you can see here in this little link from the documentation, I will share this also with you. Sure, you can suggest something. We also have different ecosystems that are here in use. Like you can do, of course, it for all the .NET languages. You can use it for Java with the different ecosystems, with Python, Ruby, JavaScript. So that is the languages where we say we support not just the language, but also different formats of dependencies. And from that, we can build this dependency graph. And with this dependency graph, what is quite cool, you can then, for example, understand which version you're using and could, for example, look up if that version is secure. Or if there is a dependency where you read in the news that somebody just took over this dependency and turned it into a crypto miner. There were cases where that happened. And what we try to do with this dependency graph now is to actually help you making your projects more secure. It's not just about showing you this with this dependency graph, but we have something we call Dependabot. And Dependabot, we have to configure it here, is actually a little acquisition that we did at GitHub. So we don't only have Qbot here, which is our famous chatbot and employee at GitHub, but we now have a second bot called Dependabot. And Dependabot did actually two things. And one thing is it goes through this dependency graph and is checking, hey, what is he using? What version is he using? And do I know something about it? Is there something in a database like the National Vulnerability Database I've opened here? Or is there some data on GitHub like this advisory database? And then on the other side, once it has this information, it will inform me and then it will work on a fix. And to use that, what you have to do in your project is to go to the settings page, and there you see this little section called security and analysis. Oh, that's a good question with the license. I will get back to that in a minute. First thing I want to show you is what you can enable here. So there's this Dependabot alerts you can set up. So it's the first thing that I get information, hey, there is something wrong in my dependency. And then the second thing is helping you with the updates. I will now enable both. And in a minute, we should get some information about this. The GitHub repo. I can give you the GitHub repo if you're interested in that. So good question here. In general, with the license, what we do so far is that on the organizational level, we have a feature, organizational insights, that lists not just the dependency graph, but also the license. The license we get from the project usually. So like we know, this project has an MIT license, like it's, for example, listed in this package.json file. And then we can give you an overview where you could filter. Otherwise, that information is partly available, but we do not yet show it here in the core dependency graph. But what I can give you for the future is there is, of course, projects where we think, how can we improve that graph? And in a few months or so, it could be that we also introduce more information on licenses, for example. So this is something we're working on. And I think the cool thing here with Dependabot is that it's really easy to set up. So if I go now back to this repository, we see this little yellow box here. And just to keep in mind, if you do it for your private repo, you can just turn it off. You get these alerts, you might get some emails, but we had also some people who did this for the whole organization. So I know from a customer who turned this off for an organization with 10,000 developers. And then at that point, he had configured it in a way that there were 10,000 emails going out to everyone about vulnerabilities, which is great. We all want to inform the people they should care about their code. But you know, some people don't like this much emails. So just keep an eye on that. So who wants to see the alerts? I think everybody. So let's jump into it. And here you see we have 6 alerts at the moment. And what is interesting is I do not just get the information about the affected package. I also see how severe this is. And the idea here is, yeah, that's also available for private repos. Really good question here, Courageous. So the idea is really that everybody can use it, no matter if it's private, no matter if it's public. What we do is also help you to sort a little bit through this mess. So we have 6 dependencies here that have issues. I think that's quite good to handle, but let's imagine you have like 200 dependencies where you have to work on, which can be in big enterprise projects or bigger community projects quite easily the case. And for that reason, we allow you to sort these. So you can see low severity, you can see high severity. I can sort this. Let's do it for the severity. Then I can see also, which is interesting, the file where it was gotten from. So the package.json or the package log.json. We have seen them before. And then we also have here this little pull request symbol. And that brings me to the other interesting aspect. I will show it to you in a minute, but Dependabot does the other thing, and that is, if you allow it to do, it will look if there is a fix available for a vulnerability discovered. And then it will create a pull request for you, and then we can do the magic of the pull request, which is reviewing it, using our CI to test that change, and update it with just a few clicks. Yeah, that was good. So what I want to do first is, let's look at one of these. Like here we have this HTTPS proxy agent. If I click on this, you will get to this detailed page. And it actually does 2 things for you. It gives you some context of how I can fix this mess. So it tells me you should update to this version at least. And the other thing is it gives me information from data from wide source. So we always use vulnerability data from different sources. And there is like here this little link, which brings me actually to this information about where did this occur, where is this vulnerability, what it's about. And then it allows me to better understand why I should care about this. The other thing it allows me to do is to dismiss this thing. So if you say, hi, I know about this bug, it's just a old school project, I don't want to fix this, hey, you can do that. We do not force you to do so, but I would always encourage you to do. These are things where you can then, for example, decide on how to handle this if you do want to care about it. And then if I look here into this pull request, what you can see here is that Dependabot already did some work for us. And the good thing is, it is not just updating automatically my dependencies, but it allows me to do this in an easier way. And how does it do it? It did 2 things here. It did create actually a new branch. And this branch here has a commit. And this commit, if you look at it, it's pretty simple. It just does one thing, and that is actually updating this package log.json. So I can see here, it has updated the version, the hash was updated. to have the integrity there. I can see when it did this commit, this little change. So this is quite nice. I can also go back, and then Dependabot gives me some more context. And why is this important? Because we all know that when we have dependencies and they do change between the versions, there can be bigger changes that can break something. And this is not nice if you depended on a certain function, for example, that is suddenly not available anymore. You just updated the dependency, your program breaks. And that's what we want to avoid. And that's why there is release notes. So you can brief through them. You can see, okay, what has changed? Okay, he did some patches there. He mentions also the people who helped them. So, okay, that looks okay so far. Nothing too big should have happened. The other thing is I can look actually in the commits, which is great. And that's the power of GitHub, because usually these dependencies are living in GitHub. So we can allow them to share more information with us as if they would be from somewhere else. And then there is this last thing, this little compatibility score. And who knows, or who can tell me what that 39%, 93%, sorry, do stand for? What does that mean? So before we get to this point, I got a really good question in the chat. And that was about how deep do we actually go with this dependency analysis. So what we did so far was looking into a little Node.js project. I showed you how the dependencies look like, how we visualize them. And then we showed you these alerts depending on these dependencies you have. What we of course try to do is to show you not just the dependencies you have, but also all the programs that depend on them. And for the specific dependencies, we give you alerts and feedback. Now you say, what is if some dependency has a dependency depends on? That is something we cannot always cover, of course, because at a certain level it would get too complex and the number of graphs we would have to build out. But what we try to do is, because of that, to improve constantly our dependency graph model. So in the future, you will see that we have more and more depth with this analysis. And the other thing we try to do is to cover more and more ecosystems to improve that further, because we also know projects that do not just have like one package manager in use, but maybe different package managers and language stacks at the same time. And then the third thing we were also doing is to give you some tools like CodeQL, and we will have another cool streaming session later this month with my colleague Sebastian that allow you actually to analyze your own code and dependencies you have there and data flows, and so give further protection. So it helps you at a certain level. I would say it helps you to fix 80% of the issues you would have with your dependencies. For the 20%, that's some extra effort we have to do in the long run, and also where you should maybe use some other tools to really be sure if that is important for you. Yeah, and as Peter said, we also have to have an in-depth analysis, but of course there are certain areas we still not cover or certain languages, but we're working on this. Now the other thing, the stored, and there was a right comment here by a user, CFCLP, that is actually the confidence level. And how we do develop this confidence level is by looking into a project that has done the same change and see if there had been any issues after that change. Yes, then it lowers this confidence level, and if no, or barely, then it's quite high. Of course, we can only give you that score if there have been people who did this change. And it's the same with these updates. They can only be done if somebody else has provided a newer version that fixes this problem. So with the score, I know, okay, 93% looks quite good. So it shouldn't be too many problems. What you can see now here is this is a full pull request. So what I could also do, I have not set it up here, but I could, for example, set up a build process. And for this, you could use a CI system you have in place, or if you have not used yet a CI system, there is actually something on GitHub you can use. And that's Github Actions. Who has used Github Actions so far? Let me know in the chat. For those who haven't used it yet, I just briefly show you what it's about. It's a really cool thing. because it allows you to create a simple automation pipeline for a project. In this case, it understands the code. So it knows here, yeah, that's a JavaScript repository. It gives me some recommendations for that. So it helps me either to publish the package itself or just to build the project, which I would always set up because it helps you to verify things. And it also gives you the choice to do other things. Like we could automate a build actually to a cloud provider. We can use other ecosystems, or what I really like is we can automate other steps. So for example, what I could create, and these are things that we have done, would be a workflow that reacts every time somebody is starting my repo. And then once this is started, for example, it could trigger a little script that would then post me a message on Slack. Or what I have also done is like using Siri shortcuts and then just telling Siri shortcuts, it should create a new issue. Like I go to the desk of my colleague Peter, I see there was bad code, so I can just say, hey, Siri, create an issue. Peter has to fix this and that. And then it could just trigger a workflow like this in GitHub and post to an issue. So this is something that you could also set up easily. If you would like to do this, you would go to this actions page. Cool thing is it is free to use for every user in GitHub. You have a certain amount of minutes you can run it for free. But even for the free user, it's like 2,000 minutes a month. And just to have a little test setup or to build your code regularly, it's enough. For open source projects, of course, we do not limit this because we want them to automate their projects more easily. Oh, that's one thing. You could set up, and then when we go to this pull requests back here, you see we have more than the one we already looked at. I could also see this pipeline here as part of the process. The other thing what you can do is you can also give Dependabot certain commands. And I think that is really important because when we use Dependabot, when we have a tool like this in place with bigger projects, with projects where we have a lot of people or specific ways we do branching, we do merging, you can configure Dependabot either with a command or do a command like this right into this pull request. You know, if you go to conversation here, down there, I can just do a command here. And the other thing is, for example, I can also use a Dependabot configuration file and then configure if Dependabot should only look for certain branches, or if Dependabot should only add certain reviewers, or if Dependabot should ignore certain versions, which is really helpful. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. Yeah? It's not just a solution that works in one way. You can adjust it. You can build on this. And this is why I really like Dependabot. And now just to show it how we can merge it, it's really easy. I merge this operation here, and then you can see I can delete the branch. And this vulnerability is fixed in that case. In general, what I would always encourage you to do is two things. Make sure you have a pipeline set up with a repository just to test if you do a change, will the test still run? Will the code still build? Can I still deploy it? And on the other side, do not just merge these pull requests. The idea here is not just to make it a one-click thing, but to actually give you the heavy lifting so that you only have to do the review and the merging part. So that was the first introduction of Dependabot. Now you have seen how does the process look like. We go on the repo, I see the alert, I care about the alert, and if there is something that allows me to fix this now, I can use Dependabot. But how do we actually get to these data that we're using here? So what you have seen is maybe these two links that we shared earlier in the chat, which have been of this advisory database. And I really like this advisory database because it shows the power of a big ecosystem like we have on GitHub. We have a lot of projects on GitHub, especially in open source, that are constantly contributed by people, but also researched by researchers or white hat hackers. And what these people usually want to do is get in touch easily with the project. And that's what is really important for us, to allow that process to be easy, to be straight down. And that's why we created two things. We created the advisory database as the place where these reportings of vulnerabilities and their fixes can be stored. and where we can even publish them as new CVEs. And on the other side, we have integrated new features into repositories that you could also use for your public projects to, on the one side, let people know how they should interact if they find something, and to draft something. And I want to show you this. So if I go back to my repository, I have this little thing here called the security tab, and it has a few sections, as you can see here. And it has this Dependabot alerts. That's what I showed you already. These are vulnerabilities in my dependencies, and I should care about them. And you see, we only have 5 left because we fixed one with the pull request. And what we can do on the other side is we could do code scanning. This is something you will learn later in another session. And we have these new sections here, policy and advisory. So the policy is straightforward. You could just set it up here, like click on this button, and then we give you some really nicely formatted text that you can then turn into your own policy. So this is Markdown. We use Markdown a lot at GitHub, and you can just draft this and publish it. So it's actually used by projects. So if I would look like on a project like TensorFlow on GitHub, what you can see here is they having the security policy in use. So if you don't know TensorFlow, it's one of these cool machine learning frameworks. I used it in my free time for some hobby projects with machine learning. It's one of the industry standards. And the cool thing is it is done on GitHub. So you see there's a lot going on here, a lot of issues and pull requests. We have over, I think it is over 147K stars. So huge, they are rock stars on GitHub. And they use this policy. So if I go there, I can understand, how do I treat a vulnerability? How do I report them? What is the best way to contact them? So I think this is really something that helps people to get started and to contact the people of a repository. And then the other thing what you can do is then draft advisories. And these advisories are drafted in a secret space that only the person who contacts the maintainers and the maintainers themselves see. And in this space, they can draft the advisory on the text side. So stating what is the issue, why is it a big issue, how could they fix that? And then create a private fork where they can actually work on a fix. So I see there's something going on in the chat. Yeah, so as Peter says in the chat, in general, what we do with this dependencies is that we give you a reporting once we find an alert. So once we find something that was reported either over GitHub, as I showed you, or if it was reported over one of the databases like the NVD. And on the other side, we also open the pull request once there is a fix available. So the alert is as soon as we know there's a vulnerability. The fix will then be done as soon as if there is a update available of the dependency. If I look into something like a draft report here, you can see what versions were affected, how they fixed it. They also linked the patch here for this. And it's actually how the raw form of this alert would look like. So this is what happens. This user here from Google published this little advisory. It was drafted with somebody from the community who found this vulnerability. And then it went into this thing here, this advisory. This advisory went into our advisory database. And from the database, we get into our security tab. So there you can see the alerts. And I think this is really cool because we have all these projects. You benefit from that. You do not just benefit from knowing about these alerts, but from getting the updates. And if these dependencies get more secure, in the best case, your software gets more secure. And that's why this is a feature everybody can use on GitHub. It's really easy to do. So if you want to use that, just go into your repository, go into settings, and there you just can set it up here in security and analysis. If you really want to learn about how this works in the back, we do have a really nice documentation page. We just launched it on this new URL, which is docs.github.com, and it gives you information about everything I showed you today. And that is, for example, here the dependency graph. So I explain how does the dependency graph work, what ecosystems are supported. It can also explain you how you can manage these vulnerabilities. So you see there's a lot of content going on. And the cool thing is it also explains the other things around GitHub. So like if you want to understand how to make my repo itself more secure, or how can I use these actions he briefly showed, it's all in this docs.github.com. And another thing I want to talk with you about is the public roadmap. You might have heard about it. So GitHub has a public roadmap, which is in a GitHub repo. So just head there. And let's look for this roadmap. So, and then we have this little project board for the GitHub public roadmap. And it's cool because if you're interested or have questions about, okay, he showed me how I can fix my vulnerabilities, but what is next for that? What other things are you working on for making my repo more secure or helping me to automate stuff? You can just go to this little roadmap page here. I will post it also in the chat. And this gives you this little project board, and it shows you what things we are working on, how confident we are to ship it in what time frame, and gives you some feedback there. So I think this is another cool thing. Have a look at this roadmap. And in general, I hope you enjoyed the session today. I want to just do a little summarization of that. Then I'm open for some questions. And then we're stopping this really nice stream today. So let's get back to it. We talked about projects on GitHub and how to make them more secure. The easiest way to do so is with Dependabot. So we have this project here. We can see these alerts, and they tell me that in my dependencies, so the software I'm building on, there might be some issues. So let's jump into these alerts. I see these are alerts. These are vulnerabilities I'm affected by. I can see that Dependabot tells me which versions I should care about in my dependencies. So I can go in this one. I can see that is the version that is affected. That is the CVE behind that. And in this case, Dependabot cannot update to the required version. And that's because there is not yet an update available, which is interesting. It can be because the maintainer did not work on it yet. It's because it was reported by somebody else and he did not have the time or was not willing to do so. But on the other side, if there is one available, he will create this little pull request. This pull request gives you information about how the dependency has changed between versions, gives me this compatibility score, and it gives me options to let Dependabot do certain things. Like I could tell Dependabot to recreate this PR. I can just do this here in the chat. And then Dependabot would act on it. The other thing I see here, which is really cool in this example, I can see that there is a CI/CD pipeline also running. So in this case, what it tells me is there hasn't been a review. So somebody should check if this change here recommended by Dependabot is actually secure. I can see that there is a problem with this version building the Docker file. So if I go there, there's this run, it failed. So this gives me a hint that I should maybe change more than just this dependency. And it also gives me the feedback by Dependabot. And that's usually why we would recommend you to not just merge them, but have something set up, go through this process. It's like if you would review the work of some of your colleagues on this project. And the other cool thing is, it is really handy because it gives you always this overview how we are with our dependencies. Okay, great. Some good comments on the roadmap here. Otherwise, this is this Dependabot. You can set it up in your repo settings. It's really handy. And I would just encourage everybody to try it out. It's free of charge for everyone. And the good thing is it can really make you save your job or some headaches. Because I can tell you the story that the biggest threats that companies faced with IT security, like when they were fined to big fines or had like massive data breaches, they usually arise from these things. That there is a certain dependency they use for years, nobody updated it because it's hard work to do. You have to find out what is affected. If there is a vulnerability, they don't do it. And then suddenly there is a big hole in their IT security because of this bad vulnerability. And then they can be hacked, for example. That's why I care about these things. Use Dependabot because it can take some heavy lifting away to make your project secure. And it's also interesting to understand actually on what software am I building? Because if you, for example, are like me, you go on GitHub, you look for some templates for a new project, the issue that can always arise is that somebody just copied from somebody else, who copied from somebody else, and then you always took just their dependencies with you. You have like 600 dependencies in the worst case. You might only need 100, but you do not really know what is going on. And that's why you should take a look at this. And it's why we at GitHub try to help you address security better. So this was today's live stream. To give you some heads up, what are we talking next time? I want to show you another section in this repository, which is about code scanning. So this is another thing that GitHub allows projects to do in the future, and that is to scan your code itself. So to really understand, is my code secure? And in this case, what you could do is in the future set up workflows within GitHub that allow you to scan your code. And how this is done will be explained by my colleague Sebas in the next session. Just one interesting thing here in the chat, and this is just something I want to share with you when we talk about Dependabot. It is not solely used for updating security vulnerabilities. We can update with Dependabot also versions. And what we also plan is that Dependabot can be used for other parts in GitHub to update them. So actually we at the moment work on updating actions. So if you have like an actions workflow in GitHub in use, it uses like a third-party action to deploy to AWS, then you could configure also Dependabot to keep that up to date, because these extensions of actions change, and then we can keep this up to date. And the same could be applied in the future to other artifacts like your container images, that we update them and other things. So the idea is really to help you with bots like Dependabot, making your life as a developer easier. All right, folks. So thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed this session. It was really fun for me to stream here, and actually my first time on Twitch. I hope you learned something. And with that, me, Mona, say goodbye to you.